remember if we wanted to record this one or not.
Yeah, we usually do.
I feel like it's been a long time.
I'm pretty sure it hasn't been, but it does feel like it. A lot's
You know,
happened.
I don't think that I agree. I don't think that it has been a long time, but it feels like it's been a long time.
Hey, everybody hopping in to join us. So we're right at the top of the hour, so we will give it a few minutes, let people hop in, and then we will get this thing started.
Someone got a fantasy football update.
That was me. It's really weird too, because my phone's almost never on loud. I don't know why it is.
That's hilarious. Had Jalen Hurts as my quarterback. Go Birds. Um, and I had Jalen Hurts, and the person I was playing, the only player they had left was the Chargers defense, and I was up by like 10 points going into it. I was like, oh, I'm gonna win, no problem. I was this close to losing. Hurts got like 1 point, and the Chargers defense got like 20. I mean, crazy.
Yeah, fantasy this year has been very hard to predict. Hey, thanks for joining us, everybody. So we'll give it a minute or two. The Slide this right over her. They always put the like little touch bar for Zoom in the most inconvenient spot possible when you go into a prison interview.
No, I totally agree. I get the same thing happen to me.
It's like, no, I don't need to have the controls right in the middle of my screen. All right, so what we will do, I'm gonna give it till 5 after before we start talking, but we can skip ahead real quick. If you registered for today's workshop, you should have received an email invite right around noon Eastern that looks a lot like this, so it's on the screen right now. If you did, go ahead and hit go to event and register. That'll get you signed in and allow you to start up the VMs in the lab. We want to go ahead and launch those as soon as possible. They take a few minutes to spin up, so it's a good use of time while we're kind of talking about Salt Typhoon and some other stuff for a minute. So again, you should have gotten this email. Go ahead, click the link, hop on in. If you did not, please let us know down in the chat so we can get you sorted out and get you registered for the workshop, okay? Is everybody that's in here now good with the workshop registration? Everybody got their link from CourseStack? Cool. That's what I like to hear. All right, that's close enough. So let's kick this thing off. Thanks for joining us today, everybody. This is going to be our cool little workshop here on emulating Salt Typhoon. We're going to kind of take you through some of the quick intel, give you a breakdown of who they are today, some of their tools, tactics, those kind of cool things, what's really driving Salt Typhoon as a threat actor. And then we'll dive into the platform and let you guys play around for a bit, develop your own usable CTI, turning in that CTI into something actionable and running your own little mini threat emulation that can kind of match up to some of the behaviors they've done. After we've done that, the flip side of the script, we've got something for all of you defenders in the house too. If you wanted to practice your detection engineering skills and diving in and hunting, you're going to be able to go and search for those same behaviors. We got a cool little setup for you. Hopefully you guys like it today. So with that in mind, if we have not talked to you before, here's some quick little intros.
Ooh, I'm up first. I thought you were up first.
Nope,
Uh,
keeping your toes.
Switched them up on me. Hi, everybody. I am Tyler Casey. I'm the lead detection engineer and the deputy of Scythe Labs over here at Scythe. Been doing DCO, defensive cyber operations, for a little over 10 years now. As an active duty Marine, as a federal employee, and now over here at Scythe. So lots of background in threat hunting and detection engineering and pieces like that. I live in the St. Louis area, and I got my socials down there at the bottom. If anybody wants to connect, I'd love to chat.
Hey guys, you've been hearing me talk for a few minutes already, but I'm Trey. I'm the lead over here for Scythe Labs and our professional services. So any of our kind of content, threats, workshops like you're in right now, all of this fun stuff, that is me and Tyler and Jared and my team. Background 17 plus years in cybersecurity as a whole and everything from basic IT to SATCOM to defensive and offensive cyber operations. Have alphabet soup if you care about that, and my socials are down there below. Feel free to connect and chat. So now that we've gotten that out of the way, where to go? What are we talking about today? So we're going to kind of cover Salt Typhoon for a little bit, the who's, what, the whys. We'll jump into operationalizing that CTI. You'll do a bit of digging, looking through some reports, pulling out some juicy little tidbits to craft your own. And then we'll actually go ahead and try to be the bad, but for good purposes, right? We're going to take that CTI and do something with it. From there, we'll turn around and let you hunt on those behaviors, check out Scythe as a platform, utilize the little threat we have made for this workshop. Just have some fun in general. It is about 3 hours, I want to say, on the clock today, right, Tyler? His 3 hour workshop.
Yes.
The lab entitlement, however, we have stood up for 4. So if you wanted to continue playing in it, messing around with the Scythe, with the CTI, with whatever you're doing, you have full reign of that until 5 p.m. Eastern today. So that is there for you guys. If you're having any issues getting into the workshop itself, seeing the manual, those kind of things, please let us know so we can make sure we get you taken care of.
Yes.
If
And
you
then again, before we go on, you should have gotten a an email from no reply at CoreStack.com, like Trey is showing on the screen. This is where our lab environment is hosted. So you will need this link, and then once you're in there, you should be able to start the VMs up as well. Please do that as soon as you go in, because it could take a few minutes, maybe 10 minutes to spin up and get everything situated. This workshop is going to be mostly labs. We don't really have that many slides, so yeah, definitely to get the most out of it, you're definitely going to want it to have the lab available. So, and like Trey said, if there's any issues with it or you didn't get an email or anything like that, please just shoot us a message so we can get that fixed before we dive into the labs.
So yeah, once you get in, your screen should look like this. What we're talking about for launching those system groups is clicking this fancy little button right here at the top that says launch group. It'll spin up everything for you. It's a little mini domain with services and other things, so it takes a few minutes. So please go ahead once you get in, hit that button so when we get to the first lab, you're ready to go. All right. So, with all of that out of the way, let's dive right into it. So, Salt Typhoon. Show of hands, who in here has heard of them before or of the Typhoon variants in general? I'm assuming most of you, since you're all here for the workshop today, but who knows, maybe this is something new. Cool. So, a few of you, yep. They have been pretty prolific over the last few years, and it's been really interesting to see the actions taken by China from all different kind of angles and what's happening. So this is kind of a cool examination of one of them today. So Salt Typhoon, realistically, they are a Chinese Ministry of State Security and PLA associated threat actor based out of China, right? They're tied into government, they're tied into the military, they're also tied into private industry. But I mean, if we're being honest, pretty much everything in China nowadays is kind of in that triad, right? It's all got a hand in everywhere. But that's kind of their associations. It's believed they've been active as early as 2019. One of their big things here is long haul kind of persistence in counterintelligence and espionage. So it's not very surprising from that perspective. The first real big public kind of disclosures and talking about them, though, is fairly recently. It was just in 2024 when it really started hitting the public news, getting a lot of traction from federal agencies and things like that to make sure you were aware of them. And rightfully so. They had a lot of fun targeting a bunch of different verticals throughout the United States and a lot of our partner nations. With that, we're talking telecommunications. This is a lot of where that initial reporting came from, right? Where Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile's getting hit. Lodging and hospitality, they're targeting that as well for tracking and understanding movement patterns for high-value targets and individuals. They're hitting local ISPs in our area. They're trying to ensure they can embed themselves and kind of get into that actual infrastructure to capture and collect data en masse. And then lastly, obviously, military infrastructure, because that aligns with their motivations and national growth policies, right? The more they can do to kind of sow fear, uncertainty, and doubt and cause issues for us on the mainland weakens our response to them in the Pacific. So they're trying to do that as much as possible with us and our partner nations, like Taiwan, Japan, Australia, the EU, these different regions. So just some kind of quick stats, some quick numbers on Salt Typhoon. Over the reporting that's been seen and that we know of, it's more than 80 plus countries that have been affected by them in general. 200 companies or so just in the United States. That's not counting our partner nations, and a ton of organizations globally, upwards of 500 or more. So they've been busy. They're doing a lot. The one thing I would want to say here when we think about them, Salt Typhoon as a threat actor, they're not necessarily flashy. They're looking to get in, sink their hooks, and persist as long as possible. Watch, listen, and learn. They're not causing kind of kinetic effects. When you think about the Typhoon variants together, Volt Typhoon is more of their kind of kinetic effect arm. They're digging into our critical infrastructure and organizations that help support the U.S. armed forces and our agencies and the things that we're trying to do globally. So they're getting in, they're trying to cause kinetic action, disrupt us, do all those different kinds of things. That's not what Salt Typhoon is about. You can think about Salt Typhoon more as the counter intel or espionage arm of what they have going on here within their variants. They're looking for, that mass IP theft, long-term surveillance. They're digging into government organizations that have, say, priority projects or strategic information. They're diving into universities because we do a lot of partnership projects between the DoD and three-letter agencies and universities. And they're using all of those hooks that they're putting in all over the place to collect information about US citizens and high profile personnel. So all of that is in support of China's operations and what they're trying to do as a nation. Anybody have any questions, concerns, thoughts over what's going on here as far as to who Salt Typhoon is and kind of what their purpose is? And I wanted to highlight that we are kind of talking about them today more as like an interception, a counter intel and espionage threat actor. So they're not necessarily as flashy as some of the others you might have seen from us in the past. There's no kind of crazy ransomware kinetic effects or things that they're necessarily utilizing right now because that's not their purpose, right? They want to live long as possible, so they're not trying to have triage happen or some kind of incident response. So they're kind of staying low to the ground. They're doing some cool stuff though. All right. So a quick breakdown of like TTPs and known like say malware variants, things like that from Salt Typhoon. Stuff to mention here specifically, their initial access, a lot of it really is public-facing application exploitive use. They're targeting known CVEs in layer 2 and 3 infrastructure, like Cisco's devices, Palo Alto, Avanti. They're also targeting, say, like the web UIs, the management platforms for all of those endpoints. Once they do that, that's kind of where they put their hooks in. They've also been known for supply chain compromise. They are extremely good at this. They try to worm their way in instead of actually having to find some way into the organization. They just get into the supply chain and get placed into the organization. That's kind of best case scenario, right? So from an initial access perspective, that's kind of what they're about. With their persistence, They have been known for several of their own different malware variants, something like Ghost Spider. Demodex as one of their rootkits is one of the big ones that's been reported on. Outside of that, from a persistence perspective, they'll modify access control lists on those layer 2, layer 3 devices to allow their infrastructure inbound and outbound and allow those communications. They'll set up secure comms through tunnels using SSH, things like that, giving themselves RDP access into the environment. And once they've kind of set their hooks in place, they're diving in, doing more kind of credential access and lateral movement and defense evasion. All of this is in support of their overall goal and impact, which is their collection of data and intellectual property, things like that, exfiltration of that back to their sources, and continuous command and control. They're doing a lot of that through a lot of living off the land, surprisingly. When you look at a lot of what they're doing, they're using pretty common tools and frameworks. Their real focus when it comes to custom tooling build out is a lot around, defense evasion and persistence. But for credential access, they're doing things like, utilizing Ninja Copy. We're seeing them doing credential dumps. They're using all the common tools you would expect to see or find on GitHub or inside Metasploit framework, right? Nothing crazy. Lateral movement, it's layer 2, layer 3 pivoting, a whole lot of like router to router. They're messing with route tables. They're adding in new configuration changes, giving themselves persistent access to those endpoints and bouncing around that way. And then collection, this is where it gets kind of cool. They were really focused on looking into some of the lawful intercept systems and capabilities that were already here within the environment. So they found a way into those and used that wiretap access as a collection mechanism for them. The other thing that they were doing, especially say in ISPs or those places, those larger backbones where a lot of our network traffic throughout the country flows, they're doing traffic captures. They're doing span ports, mirror ports. They're sending traffic back and forth, copying it off. They're setting up PCAP captures where they can, say on endpoints that have, a basic Nix OS or a capability to write PCAP files. I know we saw that a lot specifically in Cisco devices. They had that ability to just inherently write PCAPs. So they're doing that a lot. They're capturing a ton of traffic. They're looking for like authentication credentials, those kind of things, and they're shipping that PCAP off in their collections. Lastly, command and control. A lot of it is pretty standard. You're not seeing anything crazy or sneaky. They're using tunnels and say SSH access over non-standard ports, high ports, which we'll talk about more later, and having that talking back and forth through the boundaries of organizations. All in all, they're pretty kind of stealthy. They're not doing anything particularly crazy or unique. It's tried and true, trusted methodologies, things that just work, and stuff that doesn't necessarily stick out all of the time, right? But that was a bit kind of about Salt Typhoon, about who they are, what they're capable of. Do you guys have any questions before we dive into talking more about kind of operationalizing CTI and doing some of the gathering yourself? So we watch and chat. I'm not seeing any questions, so I think that means we're good to flip to you, Tyler.
Sounds
So next,
good.
we'll talk about some operational. Uh,
Alrighty. So like Trade said, we're going to take a little bit of a gear shift of sorts here, and kind of back out of just Salt Typhoon in particular, and more into how you can operationalize CTI, which is cyber threat intelligence. We're going to talk about this part because that's going to be the first bit that you do in the lab. So Trey kind of went over Salt Typhoon a little bit. I'll talk about how you can take the CTI and translate it to make it actionable, and then we'll get into the lab here in just a few minutes. Uh, let's do, I guess on this one, not really much to say other than we're going to look at some CTI. We're going to distill it down into some procedures, and we're going to add it to our threat emulation plan. Next slide. So the first step is with not all CTI is created equal, right? are reports written by different agencies or companies or people, and you'll get kind of a varied result. We categorize them into three different sections of not very helpful, getting a little better, and then the golden ticket of sorts, which we'll talk about on the next slide. But for this one, you can see on the left that it's not really very helpful. There's nothing on the left that we can just like copy paste pull out to get the exact procedures that we're going to try to emulate for this threat actor, right? So on the left, it's kind of talking about some tools, some misconfigurations, some pieces like that. Really nothing solid, nothing we can just kind of grab and carve out. On the right, we see it a little bit better, and this is what we see probably most often, which is okay. So we see the stuff on the right probably most often. It has some more of the tactics listed out. It's got some MITRE tagging, it's got some TTPs on there, it's got some kind of specific information like deleting the log files, the files in the recycling bin, pieces like that. But it also has some maybe not so helpful pieces, such as like launching commands. Like that's not very helpful. There's not very much that you can do with that. But there are
But
some
there's T
pieces,
code.
huh?
But there's T codes.
But there's T
Everybody
codes.
has
As
T.
long as you have T codes, you can do anything, right? But this is what we see a lot. You could still do quite a I mean, you can still do a bit with this, such as the deleting of the log files, the enumeration of the systems and host names and pieces like that. But these two are not really exactly what we're looking for. More of what we're looking for is on this next slide, um, which will show kind of our best case scenario, more of our golden ticket of sorts. This is actually a bit of CTI for Salt Typhoon. We'll be looking at this here in the lab in a little while. But in here, you could see that we have a bit of a description up top, which is great. We could see that they call it Earth Estuaries, which is just what can't remember where we pulled this from, but that's just the threat actor name that this company gave them. It is still Salt Typhoon, as everybody knows. They go by multiple different names. We'll talk a little more about that later, I'm sure.
I want to say it's
But
trend micro.
Trend Micro, yes, you are correct. So yeah, in this Trend Micro report, we can see it's got a bit of information up here at the top. It's saying that it's going to run this Trill client, which is a information stealer. And then this reporting was gracious enough to give us the exact commands and the exact script that the threat actor runs that has been observed in the environment. So this is really as good as it could possibly get, because in your emulations, you want it to be as close as possible to what the threat actor is doing. As you can see from the last slide, and from this one, you're not always going to get all of the information. So you might have to kind of combine them and pull them from different sources. But if you can get a bit of CTI, a bit of intelligence that looks like what we have here on the screen, that's really about as good as you can get, right? So ideally, we'll be able to find some of those in our lab here in a little bit when we start to look through the CTI and some of the references. Next slide. So I kind of talked about it a little bit, that oftentimes you'll have to take um, take your CTI and kind of break it down to make it into different procedures that you can then emulate. So this paragraph is, I think, probably close to the second category of CTI, getting a little bit better, where it's got some specific information like distributed via SMB through the $C share. They're using RDP, they're using VSS admin to then delete shadow copies and pieces like that. You can see that, well, this is a piece of Black Suit ransomware CTI just for this example, but you can see that for the Black Suit ransomware, they're using a binary called qwe.exe, so you could look that up a little bit more. Excuse me. So even if the CTI that we have doesn't necessarily give us the exact commands or the exact procedures or arguments that we can run, if we still have a bit of information, we can always kind of distill it down, translate it into something that's usable for us, and emulate it as closely as possible. So in this example, we kind of broke it down here with all of the highlighting in the bits underneath it. So from this paragraph, we decided that SMB was utilized for distribution. So it's using that $C share, likely on a domain controller, something like that, some kind of shared drive where that $C is exposed. So they use that to distribute the bit of malware across the environment. And then they utilize RDP to go to the endpoints. And then once they're on the endpoints, they then run the qwe.exe, which is their ransomware binary. Once that's done, they run VSS admin to then delete all of the shadow copies. So ideally, or not ideally for us, ideally for the threat actor, there won't be any backups on that local system. So kind of the point of the last couple of slides is, again, just to not get discouraged if you're not getting the exact command line arguments and pieces that you want. You can only emulate what is being reported on, which we'll talk a little bit more later about some of the downfalls CTI, but you can only use what's available to you. You're gonna have, more than likely you're gonna have to go in, pull down the different procedures and artifacts, and maybe manipulate them or change them a little bit to fit your use case, your environment, or just kind of fill in the gaps in between what's reported and what actually happened. And then next slide, please. So, we were talking about CTI, but where can you find some valuable CTI? These are some resources that we utilize all the time. I would say just first call out is that InfoSec Ninja start.me page that we have that asterisk by over there. We utilize that. We, as in Trey and I and team, utilize that pretty much every day. It's how I start my day to look at and see what new CTI is out there. And then Jared and myself just put a bunch of the links in the chat as well. So the InfoSec Ninja Start.me page is what that screenshot is right there. It has all of these resources that we're talking about all in like that Start.me page with the RSS feed to constantly update. It's really kind of a one-stop shop for all your CTI needs, right? But some other just call outs we wanted to throw out there. CISA DFIR report, Google Tag, which is their like Intel group that they have, MITRE ATT&CK, and Unit 42 are all just fantastic resources. They have very in-depth write-ups, excuse me, very in-depth write-ups. You could tell that they take a lot of time to go through them. Oftentimes, they'll have some detections and pieces like that included in their write-ups. It's just really great resources, free resources for your CTI. Trey, do you have anything on this? You normally like to throw in one or two for the CTI slide.
Yeah, this one's fun. So, thing to think about here, especially with that start.me page, is think of it as like it's your single pane of glass. It's a dashboard to kind of see the trends, not just in kind of like what's happening in the world, but what everybody's reporting on. Usually that's what I'm starting to pay attention to when I look at this. It's like, oh, hey, CrowdStrike just posted something about so and so threat actor. Oh, and Microsoft. And oh, hey, there's one new one from CISA. So you can kind of start seeing the trends and it helps you see who's active, what's happening, and what people are really noticing from a threat intelligence perspective and threat actors doing what they do. If there's a security company right now out there publishing articles that are relevant to cybersecurity, they probably have a feed on this start.me page. The really cool part about this as well, if you're not really familiar or too well versed in threat intelligence and collecting and analyzing and kind of enriching it, towards the bottom of the start.me page, there are a ton of learning resources, getting started kind of references and blog posts and tools and any kind of everything you could potentially need to really start your own threat intelligence program. I think the last thing I'll say on this one, CISA. If you guys have not been paying attention to CISA over the last few years, you're really missing out. When it comes to consistent alerts and advisories and releases of actionable intelligence, I don't really think there's anyone beating them right now. There's some days where I'm getting six, seven alerts from CISA on my feeds that they've published a new advisory or a new KV. There's something came up, right? So they're doing really good at keeping information out there and in the wild for everyone to be as protected as possible. And I will let you have it back from there, Tyler.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, you can hit the next slide. Definitely for sure on the CISA advisories, though. They are really just absolutely fantastic. They do just a great job. And it's totally free. Some of the other ones have some paid for subscriptions and things like that, but CISA is really great. Um, anyway, so then in there, once you've gone through those different CTI resources, right? You probably have a notepad document or a OneNote, like all good incident response teams. You have a OneNote that's got all these different procedures and pieces like that on there that you want to then emulate. How can you translate that from maybe just some text or some paragraphs or an image or something like that? How do you translate that into something a little more organized, a little more usable, something you could share with the team so it can be worked on kind of in a joint effort? And our solution to that is utilizing this document from inside of the Purple Team Exercise framework. The Purple Team Exercise framework is a framework that we've designed here at SCYTHE to kind of go through and emulation from research, execution, detections, improvements, pieces like that. But it's got a really great um, trying to think of what this slide is or what the spreadsheet is called.
Just a quick little analysis template.
I can't, yeah, analysis template. I can't think of what the name of it is, but yeah, utilizing this. template, just kind of the simple spreadsheet with what the technique, procedure, and what the reference is of your CTI. Makes a really great way to kind of keep everything organized all in one spot. And this is a document we'll be utilizing in the lab. We've kind of filled out a little bit of a starter guide for the Salt Typhoon emulations to kind of give you guys a little bit of a head start because I know we only have a few hours to go through this workshop. Has anybody seen the PTEF or utilized the PTEF, the Purple Team Exercise Framework? Curious. I will throw this in the chat as well, that link, just so you guys have it. But yeah, like I said, we'll be utilizing this to document all of our findings and things like that. Keep it updated, have our references listed out so you can go back and verify the different pieces on there. Yeah, should be very helpful. And with that, the next slide, which will take us into our lab time. So this lab, we're going to go into our core stack environment. Again, if you did not get the email or you're not in the environment for whatever reason, please, excuse me. Yeah, we're going to go into the core stack environment, go through the introduction page, which is a bit of familiarization of the core stack platform, Scythe itself. So we're going to utilize Scythe to deploy our emulations here in a little bit. We're going to have you create just your first campaign in Scythe to give you a little bit of a walkthrough of how to utilize it. And then we are actually going to upload our Salt Typhoon threat package into our environment so we can deploy it later on. Once you go through the familiarization steps, which if you are already familiar, feel free to skip over those. But once you're done with the familiarization step, we're going to get into the actual documentation of our behaviors. So in there on the hitting the books, we talk a little bit about how to build a threat outline, what makes a threat, what makes a threat viable, and then we get into the Salt Typhoon piece of it, where we have a bit of a breakdown, a little more information kind of on what Trey was talking about earlier and some different information about Salt Typhoon, as well as a bunch of references at the bottom. The point of this section is then, you go ahead and click on that, Trey, is to take all of those references and all of that reading and all of that CTI that we had in that previous page to then go ahead and start making our adversary emulation plan. We have just an example there. That's just kind of a dummy example, as well as we have an attack flow down below to just show you what an attack flow would look like. An attack flow is a visual representation of what your plan is going to be. You don't have to do the attack flow. That's in the bonus section for you guys to do later on if you choose to. But if you go to the CTI collection and operationalization, that is where we have our little our starter sheet for Salt Typhoon in there with some of the different TTPs. We went broad on the procedures here, so feel free to replace some of these procedures with actual, commands that you can run or things like that. It's just kind of give you an idea, get you started. You can either download that as that Excel document on the Unicorn hostbox or your local machine if you choose to. It's just an Excel doc with some info in there, and feel free to update it, change it around to however you want it to look. And then we'll discuss some different procedures that everybody found, see if anyone found anything kind of interesting or different from each other. And then I guess because we're already in this page, I'll talk about it. After that, we'll get into actually executing these different procedures that we found. So we have a couple of procedures that we've listed out how to run in Scythe. So we'll get into that afterwards. So yeah, for our first lab, we're going to go through the getting started, which again is that familiarization, and then we'll get into the documenting of our behaviors. I think we put quite a bit of time into this. Like I said, we're shooting for a lot more lab time than Trey and I talking. So I think we'll probably give 30 minutes and I'll check in and see where you guys are at. Don't expect everybody to be done by then. I think we allocated 45 minutes for this part of the exercise. So I'll check in at 30 minutes, see where everyone is at. And then we'll add some time if we need it. I'll go over some examples and then we'll move on. Does anybody have any questions?
Now, something here to keep in mind, you guys, like Tyler was saying, this quick core stack familiarization video, if you've never used the platform before, it's like 6 minutes long to watch. It just tells you where all the buttons and things are. The familiarization page, think of this as a handy cheat sheet on how to use Scythe and some of the modules for later. So there's not really much for you to do there. Same with Splunk. It's a good kind of cheat sheet for stuff you can utilize in the environment and on your own. This Scythe create a campaign and page is just to give you a quick head start on building out campaigns in Scythe. That way you're not having to spend a ton of time when we get to executing the plan, learning it later. So there is a bit of time on this first lab. It might seem pretty long just to do a little bit of research and reading, but we wanted to make sure you guys had a chance to play around first so that you can do the fun stuff later and spend less time spinning up.
For sure. And then I think just because I don't think we've said it yet, Trey, if you could click on the systems real quick, all the way on the left. Everything that we do in this lab will be from the Unicorn host box down there at the bottom. So once everything is up and connected, that'll ungray itself so you can click on it. Everything we can reach Scythe and Splunk. We're going to deploy the campaigns on this box. So the only box you'll need to go onto is the Unicorn host. Um, yeah, with that, if nobody has any questions, we'll leave you guys to it. We'll still be here, obviously. And then in about a half an hour or so, we'll see how everyone's doing, and then we'll go from there. Again, if any questions at any point in time, please just toss it our way, and we will see everybody soon.
You got a good question down here, Tyler, about a hunting methodology.
I'm reading it. Okay, so we had a question about any good hunting methodologies that we follow. If so, could you share it? You guys are running PowerShell scripts to pull logs from endpoints and hunting the bulk data. Yeah, great question. Definitely pulling the PowerShell or running some PowerShell scripts to pull logs is a way to do it. That I've had to do that with some incident response before, like in other organizations, incident response. I would say the first thing I would say is I would try to get a seam if that is at all possible and forward your logs into that. It makes it a lot easier. We'll talk about that in like the part three of this workshop of hunting through the seam and how it's a little more beneficial than just running the power or than just pulling kind of that bulk data back. Um, say I can write up a little bit better of an explanation for you, but yeah, I would say to to pivot to trying to ingest everything through the seam. I would also say that as far as a hunting methodology goes, for that it depends on what kind of hunt you're doing. If you're doing an incident response or if you're doing a just kind of a planned hunt in your environment. If you're doing an incident response, I always like to start at my if you're doing an incident response, I like to start where that first indicator of compromise is. So in our hunting through the seam workshop that we put on every couple of months, we start our hunt with an alert we received from the SOC for event logs being cleared. So that's kind of the starting point, and then from there going a little bit more out in time to see if there's anything else suspicious surrounding that event or that computer or that user or any other kind of indicators of compromise around that period of time, and then just kind of go outward from that. You want to kind of focus in on the event and then spread out and kind of cast a wider net, and kind of go through it like that. If you're doing a planned hunt, like maybe you're going through some kind of purple team exercise or you made a hunt hypothesis that you're then going to hunt on, um, with that, I like to identify either the most dangerous course of action or most likely course of action that I think an adversary is going to do. So the most dangerous course of action is, let's say for a lot of people, the most dangerous course of action is a ransomware campaign being ran on a file server or something like that, or on your databases or financial information or whatever is really important to your company. Most of the time, that'll be the most dangerous course of action. So you would then identify different mechanisms or ways or tactics and techniques that a threat actor, that your targeted threat actor would would perform or has been seen to perform in the past. And then the second kind of avenue we like to take it is the most likely course of action. So let's say you don't believe that the ransomware is probably going to happen. You think that a more likely course of action is that they're going to exploit some kind of front facing server, get in, do some host enumeration, laterally move through the environment, um, maybe collect some data, exfiltration, things like that. So then you could take your most likely course of action and do that same thing and develop a hunt plan based off of those tactics and TTPs that have been observed from the adversary in the past. Um, that's that's how I like to do it. If I said we you could definitely hit me up after this. I could talk all day about threat hunting. But you can hit me up after this, or I would recommend checking out our hunting through the scene course as well, because we get pretty in depth into. It's a 4 hour workshop where we just hunt for the bad guy. So yeah, hopefully that answered your question, and I wasn't too long-winded with it.
One really cool place to kind of start and watch is called the Thor Collective. Their blog, I guess you could call the Dispatch, is pretty cool. They've got a lot of different stuff written from threat hunters and detection engineers and IR people from the world over. So they'll talk about a bunch of different methodologies, cool tips and tricks, all kinds of things you can put to use. I would say subscribe to their Dispatch and check it out. Not affiliated in any way, by the way. All right. Well, with that, if you guys don't have any other questions at this time, we'll let you guys do a bit of research and digging into Salt Typhoon. If something comes up, please let us know. We'll be here behind the scenes. Hey, Lynn, it should be registered for emulating Salt Typhoon. I can show you an example of what it looked like real quick. Let me scroll all the way back up there. Yep. So it looks something like this. It would have came in around 12:02 Eastern Standard Time. Sometimes it can hit your spam inbox, so I would say check that just in case. If you didn't register, we can go ahead and get you set up as well. Let me validate we've got one for you real quick. Yep, I see you registered, so you should have gotten an email. It looks like at 12:01:08 Eastern. I would say if you need to, Lynn, just let me know and I will resend that invite for you. Okay, I'm resending it right now then. It should be hitting your inbox right now.
Hey Carol, I just saw your message. So yeah, we're not going to be utilizing Empower or Empire, excuse me, in this lab. However, if you do want to reach it, that is totally fine. What probably happened is we have to change the local host to our URL. It won't save the URL for some reason. So you have to go in and change this local host to empire.local, and then from there you can put in the username and password that it has, password 123, and then it should log you in. So you can still use it. I mean, in the environment, if you want to hop in there and just kind of see what it's all about, that's totally fine. But we're not going to be using it for this lab. We use it in some other workshops. That should get you in there. Hey Lynn, I'm seeing your comment on there. On where it says the 404 error, is there something on there that says uh like go to home or like go to events or home or something like that? I can't remember exactly what it says. If there is, you should be able to click that, and then that should list out like all of the courses that you're registered for. You should be able to click on it from there. Um, Sometimes a 404 error happens, but normally that's if the class hasn't started yet. So also, if it doesn't, so you say you got the invite link from your manager. If you need, we can send it to a different email address if you need as well. We could try that. But normally, like I said, it's just there should be like a go to home button or something like go to events, something like that. And then I think the link that Trey just put in there is to join the event if you didn't get the registration link. So I think either one of those should take you to the workshop. Okay, awesome. Yeah, I'm glad that the link worked. Sorry that the other one didn't. Yeah, I'm not sure. Unfortunately, that's like the as far as our troubleshooting capability can go over here. But so I'm glad that the link worked. How is everybody doing? In the shutdown controller step, device inactive for 1 minute. Did you put, uh, Carol, for the controller shutdown step, you're saying that you ran controller shutdown in the shell? If so, that is what terminates. Yeah, that's perfect. So the point of that was just to terminate that campaign, test. So that's totally fine that it's inactive. That's what it should do. Yeah, the copy paste between the browser and the console. It should, so that is a, well, depending on what browser you're in, but that should be a browser or a security setting. When you first go to do it, you should get a little pop-up that asks you if you're allowed to paste from inside the browser or not. Um, so you have to allow that, and then if you can't allow it, it might, I don't know if you're on like a corporate machine or something like that, but some of the corporate machines or people's work machines won't let them copy and paste. What what browser are you in? Always Firefox. That's funny. Um, Try to Google how to turn it on explicitly in Firefox. Like in Chrome in the URL, it just has a little clipboard tab on there that, or a little clipboard button that'll let me click it to allow it to copy paste. Let me look on Firefox. Mm, yeah, just from a Google. I haven't tested it, but just from seems like you can maybe do the about config and then change one of the settings to allow for the copy paste in there. Hopefully, say hopefully that, yeah, hopefully that'll fix it for you. All right. With that, seems like everyone at least got through kind of the familiarization piece. So I was just going to go over that quickly and then give you guys probably about 10 more minutes or so after that to look at some of the CTI um, in there and some of the reports. But there are just, like I said, a few things I wanted to kind of demo, make sure that everybody got. Let me share my screen. All right. Perfect. So now just kind of get into it. I know that first familiarization, site familiarization kind of went through all the different modules you might be utilizing and things like that. But the one I'm going to do first is this create campaign. So in here, I'll just kind of go through the campaign view very quickly. Call this one first, like it says. Let me open the chat up over here. Perfect. Here. So I know it wanted us to load some of these modules like the ARP, run, and print screen. Not going to worry about that. I'm just going to want to show you guys how to make a campaign quickly. So you have the modules, they'll run, different types, or they'll help you to run different types of procedures or things like that. So the run is essentially like having a command line up. You can give it command line arguments, PowerShell, command prompt, bash if you have that installed or are running it on Linux, different things like that. One of the other ones that might interest you is downloader to download some tools, um, as well as uploader, which will upload files and things like that up to up to Scythe. But you don't need to get super into that now. Some of the commands we wanted you to run, when you load some of the modules, it'll have some default ones down here. So I think we wanted you to run who am I, ARP, print screen, things like that. You can also do a custom one by clicking custom action and then just kind of typing in what you want it to do. So like ipconfig, something like that. That'll make a little more sense when we get into the actual thread emulation piece here. I don't know, maybe about 30 minutes or so, 40 minutes or so. Um, and there we had you load those. Let me scroll down, see if I'm missing anything. And then other one was to load some attack techniques in there. So we have inside the platform some different attack techniques. So this is if you're trying to emulate a specific TTP or something like that. So let's say you want to do, well, I'll just use the one that we show in the lab, right? That would make more sense. So do 1124 for system time discovery. You can select which one you want. These are from Atomic Red Team. That's why they have that symbol over there. You can configure it, and then if it needs any kind of information, it'll prompt you here. You can add the step, and then it'll add it and tag it over there on the right. One of the other ones we're going to utilize later on probably is to add existing threats. So all of the threats we have built into the platform are already in here. So if you wanted to add like APT 33 update, excuse me, or something like that, you could just click it and it'll add it underneath here. I'm not going to do that just because I don't want it to kind of take over the whole screen. Once that, you can save the threats, or excuse me, save the steps as a threat if you wanted to reference it later. I know it tells you to do it in the lab, but it's not really necessary for the workshop. And you can create the campaign. And here we have you download and execute it as a DLL. Again, just for kind of simplicity's sake, I'm going to download it just as an executable. You click download. It'll download the client, or excuse me, download the implant. Open that up, and then we'll run it as admin. Should get a prompt, scary thing from the internet. We're not trying to be stealthy or anything right now, so we can just go ahead and click more info and allow it. Click whatever prompts, like a standard user almost. And then once we get a check-in, see this little drop down, and then from in there we can click on the device itself. And then once you start loading some steps here in a second, we'll be able to see all of the different steps that are running on the platform. Is everyone able to get a campaign to execute? I know we had some questions in the chat about some of them, so I'm feeling confident. Have in there, and then like we showed you, you can open up the shell in here. In the shell, we have you do a controller shutdown, which just kills the implant, terminates it on the endpoint. But you can also, if you have the shell up, run additional commands, which again, this will make more sense, I think, when we get into the actual thread emulation piece. But you could do like run who am I, ipconfig, I'm using terrible examples of who am I. That's not really what people want to see, but just to kind of get the familiarization, run that. So you can see it'll run just like your hands on keyboard. You can run it interactively, and then it'll put what you ran back behind you over here. I'm going to leave my campaign open just in case I need a shell later on to do something else. So that's just a quick familiarization. The other piece I do want to go over is to get the threat package uploaded. So we have a Salt Typhoon threat that we've created that we need to upload into our environment. The lab environment we utilize for a bunch of different workshops. So we don't have everything in there. So we'll go ahead and load it in there. I'm in system 32, which I don't want to be in. So I'll just change it to C users. So I'll just copy and paste this PowerShell download cradle over here. This is just going to download our zip file, which we'll upload into Scythe. This you will need to do for the thread emulation steps because it has some binaries and things like that we need to upload. So please, if you have not done this, please just follow along with me. So in here, we download it into C users or wherever your PowerShell window opened up. Go to Threat Manager over here on the left. We will choose, I guess, either one of these. Upload file for import. Go to C users, and then we should see adversary Salt Typhoon. So we'll upload. Yeah, we ran into this issue earlier. I'm not sure why it's doing it, but no problem. So see, it said that the virtual file system files were uploaded. I'll show you that here in a second. but we will need to upload the threat because that didn't upload as the zip file. No big deal. So we'll go into where we have that Salt Typhoon zip saved, right click on it, 7-zip, extract here. This will yell at me, probably because I'm in this window. Let me go to this PC, see users. There we go. Right click on it and click extract here. Oh, access is denied. That's what I get for trying to be lazy about it. Put it on the desktop. Now we should be able to click 7-zip, extract here, and it opens up. So once we have that open, we have our JSON is the actual threat itself. So we will just choose file, navigate to our folder that we unzipped on the desktop. Not sure why my initial prompt opened in system 32. Probably I was messing around with something. We want to hear from our unzipped or expanded archive. This JSON file will open and upload. Then we should see it right here at the top. So this is going to be used for when we deploy some of this threat kind of at the end once we're all done. So please make sure that you imported those. If you need me to go through it again or had any issues, just let me know and I can walk you through it. If it's not working, we can hop in and take control of your lab environment, and then we'll upload it for you. So don't worry about it if it isn't working or if something happened. Um, from that, like I said, I still want to give you guys some a little bit more time. I know there's a lot of information to dig through for the CTI itself. Um, so we'll do think for the sake of time, probably about 5 more minutes or so, and then I'll kind of talk through some of the examples that we have. If you guys found any interesting bits of CTI or procedures or things like that, toss them in the chat. Interested if you guys were to see something or just kind of your thoughts in in general. But yeah, we'll do about, like I said, about 5 more minutes, and I'll do another quick little demo and show some stuff, and then Trey will be back on. We'll talk through some of the main TTPs of Salt Typhoon and then get into the actual threat emulation piece itself. So, see everybody in a couple of minutes, about 5 minutes. Jared, you and I are like on the same brainwave over here. You got me by like 10 seconds.
Well, you and Trey have been doing it to me the whole time, so
But yeah, I guess it's I'm muted now. Yeah, so this workshop is recorded and then it'll be uploaded to our YouTube page. I put the link in there. We have a bunch of our other workshops and Threat Thursdays and different pieces like that in there as well. But I'm sure it'll be uploaded probably early next week if I were to guess. Alrighty. With that, I think we'll go over just some of the CTI and pieces like that. And there were just a few things I wanted to point out. But before that, did anyone find any kind of interesting bit of CTI or a procedure that, um, something that they were able to find that's like a procedure that they could just run like immediately, or kind of what any thoughts in general, maybe some of the CTI, some of the links in there, or if you guys found any Salt Typhoon intelligence, from maybe some other sources you were looking at. Some in here, so hitting the books. In here, just kind of basically talking about what makes a threat, right? You have to have capability, hostile intent, and opportunity to make a threat. If you take one of those away, then they're not really a threat. I like to joke, I have a younger brother. His name is Shane. If anybody has a younger brother, your younger brother is always going to have some hostile intent to you, and they're going to want to beat you up. They might have an opportunity because you see him, around the holidays, around this time of the year, and the capability. I mean, he's got an arm, right? He has the capability, I guess, in a way, but he's your younger brother. He's never really going to have the opportunity to beat you up. That never happens. So your younger brother is never going to be a threat to you because you take that capability away, or you take the opportunity away. I live a couple hundred miles away from my brother. You take that away. That's how I like to think about it. He could be as mad as he wants that I stole his Pokemon cards 20 years ago, but never going to be able to do anything about it, right? And threat actors are in a similar way. They're in, depending on what your vertical is, what country you're in. The threat actor is over in Russia, banging on his desk that he's so mad at Tyler from Scythe for whatever reason. But that guy lives thousands of miles away. He doesn't have the capability to target me or attack me. But I like the younger brother analogy a little bit more. So yeah, that's what makes it a threat viable. A little more seriously into Salt Typhoon. So I had some information in here, just a lot more of what Trey has already gone over about, who the threat actor is, kind of what they target, different places like that. I'm sure you guys had read over this. And then we have a bunch of different resources down here at the bottom. I don't know if you guys thought this, but as I was going through these when we were writing these up, they they are not all created equally, right? Example of that, I'll skip over this trend micro one and get into some of these other ones like this Reuters one. So they identified a victim in Chinese Salt Typhoon cyber espionage. Um, excuse me. Um, in this cyber espionage, Bloomberg news reports, that's like an immediate red flag to me. I like, you want to be as close to the source material as possible. So ideally, you would want to see what Bloomberg news reported on this, not just some regurgitated way. Don't see that too often from Reuters. Only that's more of like bleeping computer or something like that. Yeah, you want to get as close as possible to the source material itself and not just the regurgitated thing that somebody gave you. You see in here, like quick three scrolls, and this is over. Not a lot of information that you can use here, right? This is that first category we were kind of talking about. It's got some information, like I don't care about that. This information, incident's been remediated. I guess I should have started at the top, right? That there was a breach with the satellite communication firm, but like I said, nothing. There's not a lot here. Same thing when you go to the next one, also from Reuters, actually. Sorry to be calling them out like this, but that the Army Guard was hacked. There's a memo, but again, not really any information. There's nothing you can really do from this, and just more of the same kind of going on. At least this one has some links. This will link you to a different article, things like that. But if you go back to the first one, to this trend micro one, which is also where that screenshot was from in the slides earlier, this has really got what you want, right? This was the main bit of CTI that we utilized in the emulation building itself, and it's just really fantastic. I mean, they have the literal exact commands that they ran Like Trey was saying, some living off the land, utilizing CMD. It's not didn't have to bring any of this in, but you can just copy and paste some of these commands, right? And then you essentially are the threat actor, right? You're emulating exactly what that threat actor is doing. Some more stuff on utilizing WMIC to do some process calls to call a bat file, utilizing RAR to do some archival stuff. CrowdDoor, it's got a great graphic here of how that works when installing something from a cab file, a Windows cabinet file. Lots of good information in here, lots of pieces that you can take in, and like we saw earlier, just copy and paste the script. Obviously, do some due diligence, make sure that you're, you're reading what it does, that it's not, sending your information anywhere else. But lots of information in here, lots of things you can use, lots of these that we will be um, translating into our emulation steps here soon. And those are some information, and then we get into the adversary emulation plan. Again, this one is just an example, nothing really to see there. And then we get into the adversary emulation plan specifically for Salt Typhoon, at least our starter version of it, because again, we want you guys to fill this out. One other one that we have not mentioned yet, which I think we should, is the MITRE ATT&CK groups. So if you go to that link inside of MITRE ATT&CK, it's not all just T codes. Not to say anything bad about the T codes because they are important, but inside of the groups tab themselves under CTI groups, there's also software and campaigns. Salt Typhoon has their own page, last updated earlier this year, where it gives you lots more information, techniques, tactics, resources tied to specific tactics and techniques that they ran, examples, some software that they utilized, the references down here at the bottom. So Salt Typhoon is definitely threat actor, a newer threat actor in like the grand scheme of things. I guess it's not like APT 33 that's got a page that's a mile long, but lots of good information in here from inside of MITRE that a lot of people don't really know already exists. And then we have excuse me, in our kind of starter here, so we talk a bit about DLL sideloading. We do pull out some actual discovery commands. These were, again, just pulled directly from that CTI, from that trend micro. See that they're running some scheduled tasks, utilizing WMIC, that they're utilizing RAR, this archive activity, to archive files up, and that they then exfiltrate over C2, which is pretty standard, for an organization who wants to steal your information, right? They're going to get in, see where they are, try to spread out, make some kind of persistence, collect a bunch of information that they think is useful, and then exfiltrate it out so they can, do whatever it is that they're gonna do with it. So yeah, that will take us through our planning phase. Does anybody have any questions, or again, find anything of interest that maybe we didn't identify, or anything like that?
Were there any particular behaviors or actions they took that stuck out to you guys? So giving people a second to type if they're gonna.
I like the utilizing RAR as the exfiltration technique. I actually like it more than just utilizing like PowerShell to compress the archive, because I think that it is easier to find like RAR or 7-zip or something like that. It's easier to find that activity from a detection standpoint than a threat actor just using PowerShell to run a normal PowerShell command. Um, Especially utilizing some kind of portable version or command line version. That's not something that you see standard standard users run, right? That's something only administrators use, only threat actors use. Standard person is not downloading WinRAR is not downloading WinRAR at all. It's not using WinRAR, and they're definitely not using the command line version of it to archive files.
Random side thought there. One thing a lot of people don't realize when it comes to like archive creation, compression, and decompression, Windows got tired of people sideloading all of these extra tools so much that they actually like kind of quietly natively built in support for any of the other kind of compression files you typically see with Linux or other OSs, like tar, gzip, all of those other random ones, they're all supported through PowerShell Compress Archive and the DLLs that support the Windows, like right click, send to archive buttons. So they tried to make it to where people would stop bringing those tools in, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, for sure. One real quick before we switch back over to you, Trey, for a couple more slides. We have an anonymous attendee that has a question for us. They said, how exactly was Salt Typhoon attributed to China? They didn't dump a bunch of Chinese flags on a compromised system, did they? Haha, hilarious. That's funny and a very good question that I think we may be uniquely able to answer in a roundabout way. So attribution of a foreign nation to a to an attack is very, very difficult. How it works is whatever government agencies hop on the call, essentially. So if you're doing an incident response, there will be a bridge that stood up between whatever agency it happens with, whatever agency it happens with, the FBI and the CIA and the NSA. And on that call, they essentially review the different pieces that happen, and different agencies have to agree. This is a months long, year long process. This is not just done over a call, but that's how it starts. Is literally is a bridge call. That they talk about what they found, what they've identified, whether that's where the source of it is from human or SIGINT. Human is human intelligence, and SIGINT is signals intelligence. That they combine all of those things, and I believe it's like I don't remember the exact agencies. There's three agencies that have to agree that it is attributed to that agency. So for something to be in the news or come from the FBI or the CIA, NSA to say that this is definitely attributed to China or attributed to Iran or whatever it is a very long, difficult process that relies a lot on classified intelligence and that human piece of it. So maybe not a great answer, but that is how it works. It is a very interesting process for them to go through. How do they determine those signals that are genuine and not another nation state? Again, very difficult. Most of the time, maybe not most of the time, in my experience, a lot of the times attacks don't get attributed to a threat actor. They don't get attributed to a threat actor because the government cannot decide exactly who did it. Um, um, yeah, so like, trying to think of how to. I did an incident response on this organization that was getting the request from a certain geospace. Um, and the one organization was very certain that because of where these attacks or whatever it is were coming from, that it was this nation state actor. But you guys know changing your IP address, your geolocation, or something like that is trivial, right? You could stand up a VPN, you do it from AWS, you do it from anything like that. So that's not like the indicators of compromise like that are not a good way to do it. A lot of the ways what they'll end up doing is they as in whatever government agency will somehow get the playbook, maybe the playbook of what a threat actor does, and then that way that's how they attribute it to them. But most of the time, you will not get a 100% full confidence. This is threat actor, country, nation state, whatever. It will be a more of like a likely, less than likely, more than likely type of scenario is kind of how they put that together. Um, Hopefully that made sense. It's a very convoluted process, but it's just a lot of arguing and looking at different means of attribution and intelligence and kind of attributing it that way. Or the threat actor will just take credit for it, which is normally what ransomware is. Ransomware is easier to attribute because they will tell you who they are, where nation state actors trying to steal secrets, much more difficult.
All right. Well, if nobody has any more questions, we can move on to the more fun part of this whole workshop. Let me share screen.
There it is.
Cool. Hey, it actually remembered where to put my buttons this time. That's nice. All right. So we went through this whole quick overview of Salt Typhoon. You guys went through and did a little bit of your own digging into them, kind of figuring out who they are, some of the stuff they've been seen doing in the wild. Now we're going to talk a bit about kind of like the overall concept of threat emulation and then how we're going to craft this knowledge that we now have and make it useful for us. So let's dive in. Threat emulation. So 101, really, what is it? In the end, if I was to TLDR what threat emulation is, it's just us emulating real world cyber attacks against your organization's defenses to improve overall response capabilities and seal gaps, things like that. You're trying to understand how these threat actors operate and your ability to respond to them. You're trying to identify weaknesses in your security posture. So maybe it's potential drift in an image or holes you've opened up, things like that. But you're also providing your teams a chance to respond to these incidents and these different behaviors to see not only if they can actually find bad, but how they react and the steps they take when they do. It gives them a chance to practice IR procedures and really kind of face the threat in a sandbox, right? In a crafted scenario where things are for the most part safe. You don't want the first time your teams are trying to respond to an incident or put that IR process in place to be during a live incident. So that's kind of like the big factor here for threat emulation. So when we're talking about emulating adversary capabilities, it really is going to stay based in fact. So we're going to have to kind of trust in CTI and what we're seeing in the wild as well as from our own logs and things like that. Keeping in mind CTI itself, it's not perfect. There's going to be some hurdles we might have to overcome as we go. Those CTI, and I'm sure you saw it while you were researching Salt Typhoon, it's going to have gaps, right? Like there's details that might be missing, entire pieces of the kill chain that we just don't have logs for from the incidents that are being reported on, or they just were never seen in general. So we aren't able to detail how that particular threat actor or group is doing a particular behavior. So that kind of plays into how we're going to have to decide on how to fill those gaps to replicate an entire kill chain. The other part here is the current data that we're seeing may not actually represent that threat's full capabilities. When we think about public release on threat intelligence and everything that's going on, most of the time it's very slow to trickle out, right? It's like 6 to 18 months after something happens before we might actually see a breach report or understand the attack. That's usually the standard. That's not always the case, though. Sometimes stuff gets quick released for the sake of national safety and things like that. But for the most part, it's already kind of pretty old. These threat actors have migrated, they've leveled up capabilities, maybe they've changed up how their kill chain looks or particular tools they're using. So we have to always remember that and take it with a grain of salt that we can and should be flexible with how we're performing these behaviors so that our team is going to get the best look at it altogether. Our kind of bridging the gap methodology, I think it's pretty simple, but it's pretty effective for us. Typically, we're looking into that threat actor, pulling in all the CTI we can, seeing if we can build a kill chain. If we have gaps, we go and look at other events, other breaches those threat actors have been attributed to or that have taken claim to, and see how they performed those behaviors. If there's reporting out there, we'll slot that in to kind of fill those holes for us. If it doesn't exist, we might look to kind of say like sister threat groups or people that are working in their same region, maybe have similar attributions, like in this instance, Volt or Silk Typhoon compared to Salt, and see like, well, how did they do persistence? Because there's a high likelihood they might share TTPs or some capabilities. So us at least being able to fill the gap with one of theirs will be helpful overall for the team because now we can spot a wider view of what's going on. Lastly, like if none of that kind of resource exists, they're a brand new threat actor, they're one of one, we have no idea what they would do in a certain part of a kill chain phase. We'll kind of take it upon our own experience, me more from the offensive side, Tyler from the defensive side, and us understanding how typical enterprise networks work. We'll fill the gap in ourselves and kind of answer the question of, well, how would I perform that behavior? How would I try lateral movement in this scenario? How would I try to set persistence? Things like that and fill the gap in ourselves. That's kind of what we mean there by making those kind of educated guesses or just using our knowledge and experience and creativeness to make a realistic and likely kill chain. With all of that in mind, when we're talking about emulation, I want to be clear, it's not an exact replication of what was done in the reporting. So your organization is different from ours, which is different from the person we're seeing the reporting from, which is different from the 500 other attacks Salt Typhoon has done over the last year or two. So us trying to perfectly recreate everything they have done doesn't quite make much sense, right? Your organization, your network infrastructure, the tools, the software, the hardware, everything you have is not set up the same. So your results are really going to be varied and not matter. A quick, simple example of this would be, let's say, and we've seen this where Salt Typhoon heavily targets all flavors of environments, mainly infrastructure targeting Cisco, things like that, those kind of equipment. Well, what happens if you're not running any Cisco equipment? Would it make sense for you to try to emulate those same behaviors when you don't have those features per se, or it's not a capability available in your environment? No, not really, right? Another way to look at this is like maybe the threat actor only targets Exchange and Microsoft Office apps and things like that. But you're a Google shop. So none of those tactics or behaviors are really going to be useful to you in a general sense. So we want to make sure that we're focusing on that practical accuracy, right? Not perfection in a one-to-one direct simulation of what they did. You're trying to prioritize one, the overall learning and growth of your teams, of your responders and your threat hunters, but also the improvement of your gaps, your detections, and your overall analysis. The real focus here is on growth, right? And I know there's always that huge debate, right? Emulation versus simulation. The way I typically look at it and the way I think about it, it has to be said because the question usually always comes up. Simulation I look more at as like hyper realistic, right? It's like let's say you're playing Gran Turismo or Forza or like a flight sim on a super fancy rig where you've got your own setup that rolls and pitches and does all that craziness, right? You're playing those kind of games. You're simulating the environment and the equipment and the platform you're in so that it reacts exactly as it would in real life. When we're talking emulation, we're thinking more like playing Need for Speed, right? The cars still act like cars. They do what they're supposed to do. For the most part, they function like a vehicle would in the virtual space. But you still got NOS, so you can still tune the car and do all kinds of craziness to it that you don't typically see in a simulation. It's close, but not an exact one for one, if that makes sense. So I would say that's probably enough on threat emulation, on emulating capabilities, and kind of the things to keep in mind as you're distilling the CTI. Did you guys have any questions on that stuff before we kind of get into some highlights on behaviors from Salt Typhoon? See, nothing on chat, nothing in Q&A. All right. Yeah, if something pops up down there, Tyler, just yell at me because it minimizes itself.
Will
So
do.
let's move on then. So the first one we wanted to highlight, and this is probably one of the cooler behaviors we've seen them perform, especially on like Windows host and things like that. Throughout multiple kill chains that have been reported on for Salt Typhoon, they have this behavior where they're going to utilize cab files to import all of their tooling, their malware, things that they're going to utilize in follow-on actions for persistence or say defense evasion, stuff like that. They'll name it something like one.cab, just really generic. They'll ship these in one of two ways, usually either through C2 directly, or they'll bring them in from like a curl statement, like a quick download cradle. It's a really interesting way of kind of ingress tooling because you don't see it too often. And I really can't think of the last time I read a threat report in the last few months, or maybe even honestly the last year, where a threat actor was utilizing cab bundles as their kind of wrapper methodology to bring stuff in. So it was worth highlighting and it's kind of interesting. They were also using those same cab files to move their payloads and malware laterally within the environment once they had their hooks in. But a quick example here of kind of what those cab file operations look like and what the bundles include is here on the screen. Usually they bring in some kind of vulnerable or malicious service DLL they'll use for some kind of execution. They bring in a PowerShell script, which is encrypted. It needs a decryption key to run. That's going to do things like utilizing the registry keys and other items to create new services and service groups and spin things up. And then the config and the other reg entry, those are going to be dumps that they're going to load in and create new registry keys for. And these are all different capability sets that we typically see them utilize. It can vary on what these are named, but they tend to stick to stuff that's typically pretty generic like this. For links to these, as we're digging into this, you'll have some examples in the lab manual as well. You can check out and go read on what was happening on here. But usually to kick these off, they would use a step out, a batch script that would kick off, call the cab file, bring everything out, and start running through these different behaviors and utilizing these different DLLs and PowerShell scripts and things like that. Do you guys have any questions on that one or what's going on here with the cab file operations? See, all in all, this one was pretty cool. I think the only thing I thought was cooler than this was their layer 2, layer 3 architecture operations, where they're actually utilizing the native network infrastructure, creating span ports and taps, and actually just bulk capturing data. It's a really kind of a unique thing, and it's cool to see. Tyler, did you have anything you wanted to add on the cab file stuff?
Uh, no, I don't think so. I think things like you had mentioned that we don't really see that many cab file utilization or anything like that. Normally we'll see basically the same thing, but as an MSI, so they would use like MSI installer or MSI exec or something like that to do a similar thing to this. So yeah, the seeing cab files in general, I think is just a little odd. A little, it makes something that just kind of rises to the top, makes it a little easier to find. But that's it. I don't really have anything.
Yep. All right. So let's move on to the next one then. Traffic
Oh,
capture.
Trey, hold on. They had Eric had a question. Is the encrypted PowerShell script decrypted on machine? Is it done in memory? Are there file artifacts?
So there are artifacts. The few that I looked at, they were able to find the actual decryption key and showed an example of what that looks like in one of the reports. I want to say that was in the Trend Micro one or one of the others. It's in one of the ones we referenced for you guys, but they've done a bit of both. But primarily, like they were able to decrypt it once it's on host and run it that way. Answer your question, Eric? Cool. All right. So I kind of got ahead of myself, hinted at this one a bit. They did a lot of leveraging native PCAP tools, leveraging on some of the more sophisticated networking equipment, like the Cisco, once there was at the Nexus routers and things like that. They could have like a virtual environment on them. So they were installing like a basic little Linux kernel, using it to bring in tools, capture PCAPs, things like that. The real kind of goal here and what they were doing was supporting lateral movement and collection objectives, but they were putting a focus and a priority on like authentication credentials, like basic stuff like radius, TACACS, anything they could potentially easily decrypt or find in clear text, and using that to further their overall coverage, right? Um, the naming schema you would typically see was something like this, mycap.pcap, TAC, or one. They don't try to do anything too sophisticated or crazy. Um, from some of their targeting, what they were really looking for was further on, like follow on layer 2, layer 3 traffic, the routed protocols, SNMP strings, like all kinds of different things that they were trying to find to utilize for further access or to just get a better understanding of the overall environment's picture. They're, like I said, authentication protocols, the routed protocol information. They're also using that for kind of like software enumeration, so they would know potentially as they're moving around in the environment what software is there, what they could potentially take advantage of, maybe for follow-on exploitation utilizing POCs, things like that. And then lastly, they were really looking into like anywhere they could find provider held data. So like subscriber information, particular content they had, customer records. They overall were pretty broad in what they were willing to capture and grab and try to exfil. And I think we have two more here. So persistence. Their persistence wasn't very flashy. The kind of interesting twist that we saw them doing was they're opening all of these standard protocols like, SSH, SFTP, RDP, things like that, that have been seen out there before, but they're also enabling them, the servers and the protocols for the services themselves on non-standard ports. That way it wasn't directly like binding onto that server or service if it was going to be utilized. So they place them on like those high ports like 22, 122 or some format like that, right? And they're doing that so they've got now internal external egress over like a persistent encrypted remote access feature. And that's how they're kind of setting their hooks in. They were also seen quite often of using the management UIs that are built into a lot of the newer like next gen networking equipment, firewalls, things like that. They've all got some kind of back end HTTPS management console. So they've been seen a lot taking those, using an exploit, gaining access, setting users, maybe changing the way the server runs, standing up an instance of it on a random high port, all kinds of different things to reconfigure it and ensure they can maintain access to that hardware. And then lastly, they were doing a lot of setting up tunnels for ingress and egress through the environment. And there hasn't been a ton of reporting, at least that I found, that was very descriptive about how they were doing that, what they were doing it with. It was all more very generalized, that they're just utilizing tunnels. So not too much to talk about there. Lastly, data exfiltration. They spent a good bit of time utilizing those tunnels, multiple C2 channels, and kind of custom and open tooling like an SFTP binary they had written to archive and exfiltrate that data out of the environment. So you wouldn't have just any one pipe that was pushing everything back out. They're distributing their C2, they're distributing operations, and they're also doing that with that exfiltration, right? So it's all not traceable back to any one point. From that archive perspective, they were using a lot of either their own built-in malware binary, like Tyler had mentioned previously, and they're also using the native, tar, rar tooling, things like that, WinRAR as an archive tool to collect that data and ship it out. Good examples of that would be WinRAR. We're using, I believe in the lab, we utilize 7-zip to show this off for you guys. They're not really super picky in the way they do it. They're just very good at what they do. So that's kind of covering the TTP highlights. Did you guys have any questions over those or anything that's going on there? Now, mind you, this isn't all of their behaviors, things like that. These are just kind of some of the cool ones we felt needed to be highlighted and people should be aware of. Most of everything else was pretty standard. It's a lot of living off the land. It's a lot of trying to stay as quiet as possible and persist as long as possible. All right, I see no questions. Let's move on. So, developing capabilities. This is something once you start getting into threat emulation, you go, cool, I know what the threat did. I know kind of how they did it. How am I going to do it? A lot of people immediately go into the mindset of, I need to be this APT. I need to be Salt Typhoon. They're using Cobalt Strike, so I need Cobalt Strike. They're using custom malware, so I need to make custom malware and do all of this craziness that gets spun up. It's a lot of time and effort, and it requires a lot of money to do these kind of operations, right? These threat actors, especially at a nation state level, these are entire teams. These aren't just two people in an office somewhere. Like this is hundreds of people. This is distributed operations. We, especially as defenders, purple teamers, red teamers, we're working within a budget. That budget is usually next to nothing, right? So you don't have to always have that option. But you can start simple and grow in complexity over your time as the org needs. All of these behaviors we've highlighted, as well as some of the stuff you probably saw during your research today, was all very simple. It's a lot of living off the land. It's stuff that realistically, if you just had a shell on an endpoint somewhere with your security tooling in place, you could start running those behaviors and see what's happening. You don't need fancy tooling to run some of the stuff you can see here on the screen right now, like ARP or task lists or building out a secure socket that you can connect back to over quad fours, interpreter. So those kind of things, like you don't have to be super sophisticated to get this thing started. All you realistically need is an endpoint with your tooling in place and access to a shell. Now, with all that in mind, let's say maybe you did want to build it yourself. This is something that I thought was kind of interesting and I wanted to highlight here lately. Like everybody else in the world, right? AI is kind of taking over. And it's raising the tide on what we can do as defenders, as potential red teamers, developers as a whole. It's making things faster. Yes, I know vibe coding exists. There is some pretty sloppy stuff out there, but a lot of it comes down to what you ask it to do and your checks and balances in place. But we put this kind of here as a quick example of maybe you want to emulate a behavior that you've seen from one of these threat actors, but you're not quite sure where to start. Maybe you're not a developer, something like that. You could use a GPT and your experience and knowledge of what's going on and what you want it to do to kind of query it and take that capability the GPT has to make some pretty cool stuff for you that's capable of emulating their behaviors. My example over here on the right was just a quick example of a prompt that I provided to Claude. I called my little system prompt, I gave it a name of Griot, and told it, hey, I want to make a quick beacon object file. I want it to do these things. Here's the format I want the output in, and ensure you give me an output of everything that's happening. And that's just a quick example. If you don't necessarily have all the capability, but you want to do it yourself, you can. Now, mind you, once we do these, we put it all through checks and balances. I'll have a dev look at it, make sure there's nothing wild that's snuck into my code. We'll test it in our own lab environments first before we ever think about utilizing it somewhere else. But it is possible for you to start developing your own capabilities as well. Um, that will take us to lab time. So,
Hey, that's good because we got some questions.
okay, cool. Let's see what we got. Where is their C2 infra based
Yeah. Yeah. So
exfil?
I'll do that one real quick. Yeah. Eric, kind of how I wrote down there and for everybody else. Typically, the C2 base that we see is behind some kind of cloud infrastructure, right? Either an EC2 instance through AWS or a DigitalOcean droplet is what I see a lot because they're a lot cheaper and quicker to stand up. And then typically those will go through like a redirector of some sort. And then in that link I had put in there, it has all of their observed IP addresses and domains at the time of that report on there. So you can see tons of domains, lots of IP addresses. It's very easy for them once like you're stood up behind a cloud infrastructure. It's very easy to just kind of change it real quick, which is why it's so low on that pyramid of pain. And then also the SCP that Trey had kind of mentioned. I don't know if you explicitly said it. I might have. Yeah. Anyway, for the SCP exfiltration of it, once they have those tunnels stood up on the network devices, that'll basically give them. You can think of it as a VPN of sort that'll allow them to connect directly to it. Likely, that's one like a IPsec tunnel or something like that is essentially a VPN. So once they have that connection stood up, or if they just have a tunnel that goes through kind of regular routes through the infrastructure, either way, then they could just SCP that information again out to their redirector, which will then resend it to their C2 infrastructure behind likely some kind of cloud infrastructure. And then if they're utilizing cross-popular cloud providers, how are they facilitating payments for these? I'm not sure for Salt Typhoon exactly, but I know in some of the reporting we've seen, people will just get like Visa gift cards and just use those because they're essentially untraceable, right? That's not tied to anyone. You'd have to get like a security camera at the time that they bought it to be able to identify them or something like that. Or it'll just be under some company. So like a third party provider will host it for them and then the payment goes through it. So it's just kind of like a multiple layers of kind of deception essentially. Into kind of the tradecraft of how they do it.
The
Um,
other one that's been really cool there is we've seen a lot of these larger nation state level threat actors. That's a lot of why they go after EDU. It's not just because of the information that like EDU organizations typically have or like NGOs, but it's also the ability to piggyback off their infrastructure. Most colleges, especially ones that have big tech programs, cyber programs, they all have big like AWS or Azure tenants, things like that with student profiles. So they'll compromise those organizations and utilize the services and all of the different things they provide students to stand up their own fraudulent infrastructure within those EDU domains because they're typically trusted, they're not going to be blocked in most areas, and it gives them a good kind of set point to C2. To answer your other question there, Eric, where like, do they tend to bring up their own infrastructure only for C2, or have they ever compromised other endpoints and used them? Yes, this is something Salt is pretty well reported on and known for, is they're utilizing everyone else's infrastructure for their C2 operations. That's a big reason why they go after layer 2, layer 3 networking infrastructure and devices, is they're sitting there and they're branching out and using that as like their distributed C2 as they dig deeper into other organizations and environments. It's a lot of like why they're going after ISPs. So they'll build their tunnels into those major big points, those major big hubs, like their ISPs or the other providers, and then tunnel out from there. That's kind of what they've got going on here. So like the Raspberry Robin malware, that was a great example actually. Um, Anything to add on that one, Tyler?
No, I think that you hit right on that. I know that Carol has a question, but Jeffrey has one as well, so I'm going to handle Jeffrey's real quick, and then you can answer Carol's. Uh, Jeffrey, great to see you again. I know if I can count on anybody, it's that Jeffrey's going to be in this in our workshops. But he asks, how does one determine if zip archiving tools are anomalous? I'd say the first way that you can identify if it's anomalous is just by having a baseline of what is normal in your environment, right? 7-zip, WinRAR, tar, you can download like tar.exe to use on your Windows machine. These are all just Windows examples. But those three, if that's something as a threat hunter or as a local defender, whatever your title is, if that's something that you don't see your users utilizing, that right there immediately makes it rise to the top of it being anomalous, right? There is no substitute for knowing your environment and knowing what is normal and what users are doing. Another one, if it is normal, it is something that's utilized in your environment. Who utilizes those, right? Again, utilizing 7-zip command line is not something that typical users do, right? That's something that I do, because I don't know, I'm a security person. I like the command line. That's something that would be normal for me, but for like a standard user, maybe someone working in accounting, they're not going to be making zipped archives with a 7-zip command line argument, right? The next one is, or the last one I'll say is, when was that put there? So if somebody, if and where was it put there, and where did it come from? And what I mean by that is if you see, let's say, I think we actually see this in a lab with PSExec, we're going to download PSExec with a wget PowerShell cradle. So if you see a command line argument of someone downloading 7-zip portable from a strange process running out of temp, and then like 2 seconds later they're running a 7-zip portable command to then archive a bunch of stuff, that should also probably trigger something, right? But the first one I would do is just, is this normal? Is this something people normally do? If it's not something people normally do, then it should rise right to the top.
Yeah.
So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, I'd say the two biggest things there, like Tyler was alluding to, is one, that asset inventory, right? If you don't understand the common hardware, software, like tools that are being utilized in your environment, how will you ever know if something's good versus bad? But that also then leans into common user behavior. If all of a sudden John in HR is doing some crazy PowerShell stuff when historically he's never been able to even open a command line, it's a little fishy and at a minimum worth investigation, right? So understanding your organization, your assets, the things that you have for users to utilize, and their behaviors is really that kind of key factor here.
For sure. And then I'll
And
let you handle Carol's question.
so this one, Carol had asked, but how to check if that chat GPT or that GPT in general is doing things right when they're creating that new payload for you.
You
That's
just
kind of,
give it to another GPT, right? And then you have them
yeah,
just argue.
exactly. You just have them talk
I
back
couldn't
and
help myself.
forth.
I couldn't help myself. Sorry.
No, but actually that's kind of part of it too. A lot of the times I always have it provide me an output, like break down the code you created, tell me what it does piece for piece and explain the overall architecture. From there, I'll take it, I'll ship it to another, like say if I'm using Claude, I'll ship it to ChatGPT with a specific um, prompt in place and tell it to analyze it and tell me what it thinks is going on. I'll see how they match up. But most of all, typically having a good friend or having an understanding basically of development and what you're trying to utilize and in the languages you're trying to utilize is the best case. But I'll use one of our engineers or our developer friends say, hey, can you give me a look over of this? Do you see anything funky? Is there something wrong here? Does this meet my intent? So I'm never just making things in a vacuum and running with it. I'm always going to have some sort of check and balance in there, whether that's another person in place, a person in another GPT, or something like that. It's a really weird place to be right now when it comes to development.
I'd say just the only thing I'd add on that, had brought this up in a different workshop a few months ago. Once, using the AI or LLMs really, using them is great and super useful, but once it's like made the thing and you download it, once you do something with it, that's yours, right? You can't blame Chat GPT. You can't sue like once you do that, whether it's for report writing or making binaries or doing whatever, once you take it and execute it, it's yours. So you really have to kind of do your due diligence, and just make sure that it's doing what it's supposed to be doing.
All right. So yeah, that we've kind of been good questions this workshop, so we're running a little long. We're going to dump you into another lab time now. What this is going to take us through is we did down through documenting our behaviors, right? Yep. So executing our plan. Within this piece, you're going to kind of talk through putting this plan to action, what we expect, what's going to happen. You'll go in and then work through creating a new custom campaign. We give you some kind of tips and parameters again. Keep in mind that if you need it, there is a quick Scythe familiarization cheat sheet up here that can walk you through how to use particular tools, outputs, things like that. But on top of that, we've also down here say in these follow-on sections, they outline particular behaviors, things that we've seen in reporting. Mind you, it's not all encompassing. You did a lot of the research yourself as well. Try and build to those. But we've given you a breakdown of the overall behavior, what was typically seen, how we expect it to operate. And then down here at the very end, we also give you some examples of how to run and perform that behavior utilizing Scythe. So what we're going to work on for this next lab piece will be from putting the plan to action all the way down to running a custom campaign. So these are going to allow you to get some practice, not only building out and utilizing the behaviors you researched and the ones we've highlighted here, but also a little bit of time playing in Scythe and getting to kind of see how this whole semi-automated, automated fashion works. It's really interesting. And we've given you a couple of little challenges down here on a custom campaign as well. So I think we said so 30, 45 minutes for this part of the workshop. I think we'll probably still run with that time frame, but I'll check in with you probably at 15 minutes and then again at 20 just to kind of see where you're at. I don't want it to sit too long and eat up a lot of the time we have left today if you guys are kind of moving a little quicker. Of Is there any notes we needed to give them in this section, Tyler?
I was just gonna share my screen real quick to show something.
Cool.
Um, 1 second that I think might make it a little easier. I think we need to um, update update something. But the so like Trey said at the bottom, where it shows the chapters at the bottom, so we talk about the TTPs and everything and the procedures, why they do it, et cetera, et cetera. And then at the bottom we have the actual like commands you can run in Scythe. So you can do that either through creating that custom campaign we had showed earlier, or if you're inside the shell, it honestly might be easier. So if you have a campaign that's running, even if you have that first one that you ran before, you can just rerun it, and then click on the shell up there. And once that loads, really it's just as simple as taking the command you want to run, copying it, pasting it into the shell, and then you can go through the examples like that. So it's a lot faster than making the whole campaign and then executing it in these examples. So it may be easier for you guys, like we're saying, to just kind of read through it, and then if it'll let you grab it, and then you can just copy and paste them as it goes down. Again, the host enumeration stuff, not super fly off the handle cool, but there are some pretty cooler ones in there with like the data archiving and things like that. Again, the only other piece in that is these that require binaries, for example, 7-zip right here, 7-zip R. Um, that will be in place as long as you imported the threat that we made earlier. So if you did not import the threat earlier, please let me know and I can kind of re-walk you through that. But you need those binaries to exist so you can download them. But that's it. Yeah, main thing, using the shell will probably be a lot faster for you guys, and easier than making the campaign build out.
All right, so with that in mind, we'll go ahead and kick off a quick timer. It's 3:15 now. I'll probably check back in with you 3:30 Eastern, see how you're doing. Again, if you guys have any questions or concerns throughout this section of the lab, please let us know either down in Q&A or in the chat, and we're here to help. We'll come back after that. We'll do a quick kind of walk through what all was there. And then with the time left, we'll dive kind of into some detections and hunting. See you in a bit.
Hey, Paolo. Yes, there is a way to view it. Let me share my screen real quick and I'll see if I can show you. Um, yeah, so I'll just upload a random file just to show you how it looks. Wait for it to come back. And then I'll do just run cmd/c echo words to file.txt. And then I'll use uploader remote path, and then it should just be file.txt. And then once you do that, like you said, you can see that it returned the hash there. You go back to the like campaign view here and click on that step. There's three dots, and then we can download it. And then you can see the contents here. This is just that text file, so it just says words on it, but it should be, I think you said that compressed file. It should just download the compressed file for you so you can view it.
All right, how's everybody feeling with this portion of the lab? You think you need a few more minutes, or you ready to move on and talk some hunting and detections?
Which to throw it again, also, you'll have an extra hour when it's done. We're just trying to get through the rest of the slides real quick so you guys can have the rest of the time in the lab.
Okay, I'm not seeing an opinion one way or the other. Tyler, I think it might be smart of us to just get through the slides real quick, and then if they
Yeah,
want to see anything at the end, we can show them.
totally agree. One sec, just getting my stuff set back up.
So they asked some good questions earlier, kept us talking longer than we normally do.
Yeah, you guys have been in a great group. Sometimes it is difficult to get some communication during these all virtual ones, so I really do appreciate you guys having lots of good questions and comments and such. All right, for detection. So on to the last section that we'll talk about, and like Trey had said, we just want to make sure that we get through all the slides, and you guys can jump back into the lab if you are not done yet. Let set up. Alrighty, talking detections. So first kind of part of detection that we'll talk about is just where you keep your data, right? So in this lab environment, we utilize a SIEM. The SIEM that we are utilizing is Splunk. It's also Elastic is really popular. Some people still use QRadar, Sentinel, different ones like that. There's all kinds of SIEMs. They all essentially work the same way, right? They're a log aggregator that provides you one centralized view of your information. So you would have your host log or your endpoint logs, your network logs, maybe firewall logs, all different logs that you have across your enterprise. You want them to get to forward to a SIEM. That way you can view everything all in one spot and can kind of correlate all the different ingestion points and log sources and things like that. Like for example, maybe you see uh, strange you see a process like let's say curl.exe is reaching out to this IP address, right? You have curl reaching out directly to the internet. Maybe that's kind of weird. You could then take the endpoint logs you have of that curl process creation or that curl network event, and then also pull up the logs that you have in your firewall, maybe, or your proxy logs, or your some kind of edge networking logs, and then you could correlate those together in real time, all in one view to give you some more information. Um, tons of benefits, kind of like I was talking about that event correlation. It is difficult to correlate events across an entire enterprise, right? Your machine makes thousands of logs, hundreds of thousands of logs, in not that long an amount of time, and having one spot to kind of correlate everything really does make it a lot easier. Real-time monitoring, you get your logs ingested in pretty much real time. If your logs have to go over some strange networking configuration or maybe some weird tunnels or something, it might take a little bit longer, but generally speaking, you should be able to get your logs within 45 minutes. That's kind of a far right lateral limit, which is still pretty much real time. It's not like days or weeks having to get everything all together. Alerting, you can set up alerts. So if an event does happen or a rule is triggered or something like that, you'll get a pop-up or you'll get an email or text or however you have it set up. And then you can see historic trends because it stores all of your data for whatever your retention window is. So depending on how much storage you have, what the requirements are, you can hold data for years or have some cold storage data offsite that you can then re-ingest into your seam if you need to. If you see some events happen around that time frame and you need to re-ingest it to do some hunting. And then the last one is you'll never forget to buy milk. This is kind of a joke, but not really. The seam is used for things more than just th th threat hunting. There's organizations like Domino's that use it, and police stations that use it to identify areas where I'll use the police stations as an example. Some police stations and jurisdictions will ingest their crime stats and where people get pulled over, where accidents happen, where red lights are, where stoplights are, all kinds of information like that and metrics like that. They'll ingest into a seam and then use it to basically do data analytics on what's happening in that area, and then can make it like real life adjustments based on that to better serve whatever community they're in. And our example of don't forget to buy milk. Let's say you have a fridge.log. Your fridge.log is monitoring everything you have in your fridge. It sees that you're in your fridge.log that your milk is low. So then it triggers an automatic alert, which then orders you some more milk, maybe through DoorDash or something, and then you get it. But yeah, a lot of practical kind of uses for it outside of just threat hunting, but it is extremely useful and we highly recommend it. And I highly recommend using Splunk because I think that it is the best one. Over to Splunk because we're talking about it. Just an example of a Splunk query if no one's ever seen it. Excuse me. All seams work in essentially you're trying to match a field to a value. So in our query up here at the top, you see that our field is event code, command line, image, and then the values of those are one, ping, and ping respectively. So in here we're looking for values that match these fields that we're in. So event code one is process creation. It's looking for someone utilizing ping in the command line argument, and then this exclamation point equal sign or this bang equal sign of ping means that we don't want the image to be ping. So someone that's running ping from, in this example, we could see that they're running it from PowerShell. We could also see Microsoft Edge was hit on that. That is more than likely a false positive. I'm sure in this kind of randomness it has over here that ping is somehow incorporated. The PING letters are incorporated in there, which should be a false positive, but you should always kind of investigate your false positives to make sure. But just an example of what your Splunk query will look like. However, you don't really need to worry about generating some custom Splunk queries right now if that's not something you're used to or something that you don't want to do. There is an amazing program called Sigma, which will kind of give you a Kickstarter into your detections. So Sigma is a format you can write detection rules in, and then you can quickly translate them to go into whatever SIEM or whatever EDR you're utilizing. So like we see Rapid7, Splunk, Elastic, Sentinel, CrowdStrike, etc. over there on the right. So it'll translate your rules. You can write it in one language and then translate it to whatever SIEM you're utilizing. It's really useful to use across multiple teams and kind of share different bits of information. Into the Sigma rules, which will translate in the labs. This is an example of a Sigma rule. In this rule, it is looking for compressed data and locked with password for exfiltration with 7-zip. I think we actually use this exact Sigma rule in the lab environment, so you will translate this in the lab here in a few minutes. But this is what the rule looks like. You can see under the detection piece here, that's really where the meat of it is. So you can see that it's looking for the description or image or original file name has something to do with 7-zip. It has a selection password, so the command line argument needs to contain that -p, and then selection action of either an A or a U with the space on either side. And for the rule to hit, it has to meet that condition at the bottom, which is all of selection, which will make more sense once we translate it here in a minute. So to translate it, there's a couple open source tools out there. The official tool from the Sigma project is Sig Converter. You can go to sigconverter.io. It should be bookmarked in the lab on the Unicorn host as well. And in there, you just paste your rule on the left. You select your backend up there. So in our example, we're using Splunk up there in the top left. So we select Splunk, and then it'll auto translate your rule to a Splunk query, which you can then copy and paste into Splunk. And then if you have any hits, you'll see it down there at the bottom. So in this one, you see that it translated it on the third line here, that it's looking for description or image of 7-zip or 7z of some sort, or the original file name to be 7z or 7za, which is the 7-zip original file name. And it's looking for the command line arguments to have either the -p, which is the password, or the A or U. One of those is archive. I'm not sure what the U stands for, or what the U flag does. And then we table it out so we can see the results. Then we see down there at the bottom that somebody ran 7-zip with a password, and they took that recon.txt and they turned it into an exfil.7-zip. So this is not the same of what it's going to look like in the logs. Just an example of how you would translate it. And then that's our really just kind of quick and dirty. This is what Sigma is. This is what's Splunk is. And then inside of our lab, here we go. We get into our first hunt, which again kind of just goes over the same thing that I was talking about. Sigma, Splunk in general, runs you through a search some interesting fields, and then hunting on the actual adversary behaviors themselves. So each of these detections go with the executing our plan actions we executed a little while ago. And then the rules themselves, I have them as drop downs because they kind of take up a lot of room. So you could just skip by them if you don't see it. But under the Sigma rule, we have the rule itself, and I'll show you guys just how to translate it. Go to uncoder.io, or excuse me, not uncoder, sigconverter.io, and then we will paste our rule on the left. This was something that we saw just today on our final checks in the lab. The version 2.0 seems to be broken. So just click this little gear and select 106. And then our target up here is Splunk. Again, if you have access to your actual ED or your actual tools you use in your job, you can change this target, to fit whatever tool that you're utilizing. And you can see it translate it in real time. And then you can grab this, paste it into Splunk in the lab environment, and then you should see some results. As long as you ran the steps in executing our plan, you should get results back for each of our Sigma rules. We also have a converted version of it, because once we saw that the Sig converter wasn't working earlier, I just translated them very quickly. But you should really try to use the Sig converters. You can see it translate in real time. So yeah, we have a couple examples of that, and we have some independent practice if you want to go out and find some additional Sigma rules or craft your own detections or things like that. You are more than welcome to. And then the lab environment, this is the last slide that we have, just thanking everybody for coming in. We'll use the rest of the time to go through this hunting piece. If you guys have any other questions or things like that before the time's up, about 20 minutes or so, please let us know. You have that additional hour to be able to go through and find, and execute different actions, do some research, play around in Scythe, do some hunting, whatever it is. And then don't forget, on the conclusion page at the bottom, we do have a CPE document. If you need that, so you can submit it to your different governing bodies to get credit for this workshop. So with that, anybody have any questions or anything like that? We'll just take like I said, this last 20 minutes or so, go through the hunting, and then feel free to really run whatever else you want to inside of the environment. All right. So, well, I will leave you